listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and I help people who are engaging in anything they think counts as infidelity to deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. No shame, no blame, no judgments. If you are in the midst of an infidelity situation and you're ready to begin the process of resolving it in a way that's truly right for you, let's work together. You can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com, and you can learn more about the coaching packages I currently offer new clients beyond that introductory session on the services page of my website. I offer confidential, compassionate coaching via Zoom, which means we can work together no matter where you're located. I can't wait to meet you. Okay, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while now, or even just for the last few episodes, or if you're on my email list, you know that I recently offered to answer listeners' questions on the show. And people have been sending me lots of great questions and some questions that I can't answer, sometimes because I'm just not qualified to do so, and sometimes because the questions are just a little too long and convoluted. So for instance, some people have asked me legal questions. I can't answer legal questions. You wouldn't want me to answer legal questions. And as much as I want to help everybody, if you sent me a really long description of your situation and a bunch of questions about what you should do about it, I encourage you to schedule a coaching session with me. I encourage you to consider working with me on an extended basis. That's what coaching is for. It's for us to take a close look at the specifics of your unique situation and to address all of the questions that you have in depth and detail. Now, that said, I am going to make at least a couple more of these episodes to answer more of the questions that I've gotten. So if you don't hear yours answered today, an answer may come on a future episode. Stay tuned. And without further ado, let's answer some questions. I got a whole bunch of questions about what to say to someone you are breaking up with or divorcing when a part of the reason why you're breaking up with them is because you're cheating on them and you want to be able to pursue a relationship with your other person. People wanted to know how to give their spouse or their committed partner a quote unquote good enough reason for wanting to end the relationship without being transparent about their infidelity. In other words, how do you break up with someone you've been cheating on without letting them know that you've been having an affair? Let's start with the question of what counts as a good enough reason to end a relationship or leave a marriage. You may want to consider that as far as your spouse is concerned, as far as your partner is concerned, there might not be such a thing as a good enough reason for you to leave your marriage. They may just want to stay married to you or in a relationship with you. And any reason you give them for why you don't want to stay in a relationship with them may not be a reason they find satisfying or understandable or even acceptable. That's something I've talked about in other episodes, including the one that's called Breaking Up with Someone You've Been Cheating On, which is episode number 131, I think. And to echo what I said in that episode, as well as in the other episodes I've done about breakups, is that it isn't your job to convince your partner that it's okay for you to want to leave your relationship with. That might sound callous or cruel, and perhaps it is kind of tragic. After all, we tend to get into relationships by mutual agreement. But for a relationship to end, only one person in the relationship has to want it to end. And that may seem sad, perhaps very sad. But I want to suggest that the solution to that sadness is not to try and come up with a quote unquote good enough reason to tell your person that you don't want to be in a relationship with them anymore. The solution to the sadness is to allow the sadness. If you break up with someone who doesn't want to break up with you, it doesn't matter what the reason is to them. They just don't want the relationship to end. Who cares if it's a good enough reason or not, right? Now, in addition to that, as I've said on other episodes, I do think it's really important to clearly communicate what you have decided in terms of your continuing participation in your relationship. So for instance, if you have decided you want a divorce, I encourage you to say exactly that. So often we focus more on justifying our decision to our partner than on clearly conveying what specifically we have decided. You don't need to justify your decision. It may not be possible for you to justify your decision. But my opinion is that one of the most generous things you can do for your partner, if you're breaking up with them, is be really clear about what exactly you have decided. And you can certainly give them some insight into why you want to leave the relationship. Absolutely. I think that in a lot of situations, breakup situations, it's appropriate and generous to do that. But you've got to remember that even if you give your partner 20,000 detailed reasons why you don't want to be romantically involved with them anymore, they may not consider those reasons good enough reasons for you to want to leave. But that doesn't mean that you can't give them some sort of an explanation. You can still give them some insight or reasons as to why you're choosing to leave the marriage or leave the relationship. And you can make these reasons have everything to do with them and your relationship with them. And you don't have to say anything whatsoever about the infidelity you're engaging in. You can be honest about why you want to leave the relationship without being cruel. You can be direct about why you want to leave the relationship with them without blaming them for anything. The truth of the matter, aside from whatever you have going on in the infidelity department, may simply be that you aren't interested in being romantically partnered with your committed partner anymore, or something to that effect. The truth may be that you care about them very much, but you want to be able to pursue a different kind of romantic relationship. We tend to think that wanting something different isn't a good enough reason for wanting to leave a marriage or wanting to leave a committed relationship. But what if it is? What if that's a totally sufficient reason for wanting to leave? And you could probably be even more specific than that. Let's say that you are dying to travel the world and you have the means to do so, and your spouse has made it clear that they never want to leave their favorite spot on the couch. You can tell your spouse that it is deeply important to you to be with someone who is as passionate about travel as you are. You don't have to tell them that you've already met someone else who fits that bill. You can be very honest about some things without telling them everything. And again, I'm going to say this yet another time. It's not your job to make sure that your reasons for wanting to leave are good enough for them. You don't have control over that part, but you do have control over clearly and consistently conveying what do you want and why. Now, if your spouse asks you outright or your partner asks you outright if there is someone else and they aren't satisfied with you saying something like, well, I'm ready for another romantic relationship, or something equally honest but also evasive, you may be faced with the choice to lie or not lie. That is what it may come down to. And you get to weigh the benefits and drawbacks of telling the truth or not telling the truth. Some people ask questions like, well, how do I make sure that I don't have to lie? Well, you don't have to lie. You might choose to lie, but you certainly don't have to, right? And you may be put in a position where you need to make that decision, or you don't have too many good alternatives to making that decision. And there may not be a way to entirely avoid that. Now, in follow-up, some folks ask questions about how to then give other people outside of the marriage or the relationship a good enough reason for why they chose to leave the relationship or why they wanted to leave their marriage without disclosing the existence of the affair partner. Here, too, you can probably be honest with people about some things. You might say that you and your spouse had grown apart. That might be very true. You might say that you came to realize that if you were going to be in a romantic partnership at all, you wanted to be in one with certain attributes, and your marriage didn't have those attributes. That might be very true as well, right? We may think that we owe people an explanation or a particularly detailed explanation of why we've made certain decisions. But do we? I want to suggest that we might not. And if other people think that you owe them a particular sort of explanation as to why you have chosen to leave your marriage or your relationship, you can let that be their problem. And then you can introduce your former affair partner, who is now just your partner, to your family and your friends when you see fit, and you can say as much or as little about the origins of that relationship as you see fit. I think I have a podcast episode about this, but I'm not sure which number it is right now, and I'm not even sure what it's called. And if people want to speculate about the origins of your relationship with your new partner, well, guess what? They can speculate. Here's another question. How do you determine if the quote-unquote love your affair partner professes is genuine or just a ploy to keep you on the hook, especially when this is intertwined with trust issues you have with your affair partner? For example, are you really the only affair partner they have? This is coming from the perspective of someone in a 5-year affair in which neither party is planning to attempt to be together outside of the affair. This is such an interesting question. How do we ever know if the love someone professes for us is genuine, quote unquote? I'm asking that question very seriously. My answer to that question is that we assess, using whatever framework we are operating from, whether or not we think someone's love for us is genuine. Or put a little differently, we simply decide whether we think someone's love counts as genuine or not, based on our operating criteria. It might sound wild, but there is no way to objectively determine whether someone's love for us is genuine or not, or if it's even love at all, right? But we can decide to believe what someone says to us or not. We can decide to interpret someone's behavior as an indication of what we consider to be genuine love for us or not. And the same thing goes for the question of whether or not we are the only affair partner someone else has. How could we know for sure? We might be able to investigate, but we might not. We might not really ever be able to know for sure if we are someone's only affair partner. Or maybe we could find out, but maybe the things that we would have to do in order to find out would be difficult and nefarious and potentially illegal and not necessarily worth the trouble. We might prefer to take someone at their word, or if we think we have good reasons to suspect that someone is telling us things that aren't true, we might want to choose to engage in the relationship differently. So if you are entertaining questions like, is my person's love for me genuine? Am I their only affair partner? I encourage you to get really clear on why you are asking yourself these questions. For instance, why do you think someone might be professing love as a ploy to keep you on the hook? My guess, and this is just a guess, but it's the guess that I'm working from, is that one of two things could be going on if you're asking yourself that question. One possibility is that your affair partner is doing things that you don't like, and you're trying to make sense of that behavior or figure out what you want to do in response to their behavior. And another possibility is that your mind is just looking for something to fixate on that's wrong or freak out about that doesn't seem quite right. Sometimes our minds do that to us. They look for things to obsess about that we don't like. It's a real bummer, but it's a really human thing. So be alert to that possibility. Be alert to the possibility that your mind is just looking for problems. But also ask yourself, is my affair partner doing something that I am genuinely concerned about? Are they doing something that I genuinely don't like? If so, what exactly is it that they're doing? And why don't I like it? And what do I want to do about it? It may be that your person is behaving in ways that you don't like and you want to talk to them about that. You might want to set some different boundaries. You might want to consider ending the relationship. But if we're just repeatedly worrying about whether or not someone's love for us is genuine or not, or whether they're just trying to keep us on the hook or not, or what they're doing when they aren't with us, we might just be driving ourselves crazy. Here's another question. How do you grieve a marriage when you have decided to end it and pursue your relationship with your affair partner? The person asking this question says that they have listened to the podcast episode on grieving the end of an affair. So here's my response. To a great extent, there are similarities between grieving the end of a marriage and grieving the end of an affair. There are likely to be common threads or themes within grieving the end of any romantic relationship that was important to you. On the one hand, it just may be sad, right? And you may want to allow yourself to be sad. But on the other hand, there are also some differences between grieving an affair and grieving a marriage. If you're grieving the end of your marriage and you're involved with the person who was your affair partner, but is now just your quote unquote normal partner, chances are your partner knows about the end of your marriage. Chances are you don't feel compelled to hide your grief or completely hide your grief. So that can be a huge plus. However, your former affair partner may, not necessarily, but may expect you to be so excited about the two of you getting to be together that you aren't sad about the end of your marriage at all. And that can be a little tricky to navigate. If they're expecting you to be over it, and it meaning the end of your marriage by now, and you're not, that can be hard. Or it may be the case that you are surprised by the extent of your grief. You may have really wanted to leave your marriage, and it may be strange to find yourself having mixed emotions now that it's over. My main piece of guidance is this. Allow for the experience of leaving a marriage and grieving its end to be strange. Allow for the experience of the transition to surprise you. Be attuned to the possibility that there may be some aspects of the grieving process that you'll want to keep to yourself, no matter how supportive and understanding your new partner is. And it's also important to consider that there may be aspects of your experience that they just don't get or aren't able to be compassionate or understanding towards. That doesn't have to be a problem. Remember, too, that it's normal for any big life change to come with mixed thoughts and therefore mixed feelings. For instance, you may wake up some mornings and kind of wish you'd stayed married. You may wake up some mornings and really wish you'd stayed married. But you can allow those thoughts to float through your mind without making them mean that you made the wrong decision or that you need to dash off to try to get your ex-spouse back. You can intentionally do multiple things at once if you're grieving the end of your marriage. You can allow yourself to have mixed thoughts and feelings about the end of that relationship, and you can very deliberately allow yourself to feel your grief, and you can also actively remind yourself why you chose to leave your marriage and dedicate yourself to making your current life wonderful, including but not limited to your relationship with your current partner, right? These things don't have to be in competition with each other or cancel each other out. More than one thing can be true for you at once. Seemingly conflicting things can be true for you at once. You can be really twisted about the end of your marriage and also really delighted to be living your new life with your affair partner if that's what you chose to do. Here's another question. I'm a betrayed spouse, quote unquote, and I have found your podcast incredibly helpful. I am choosing to stay married for reasons that I like to my husband who is unfaithful and lies to me. But at this time, I am choosing to live in this reality and commit myself to the marriage. How do I think about this so I can stop torturing myself over a person I can't force to be truthful? Okay, there are a lot of different ways we could approach this question. This person says that they are choosing to stay married for reasons that they like. Assuming that is true and this person knows for sure that they like their reasons and they're not just telling me this to try and put on a happy face, my question is, how much can you focus on what's awesome about the reasons that you like for staying married? How excited can you get about your choice to stay married? You may find that you can like your reasons for staying even more than you already like them. You may find that you can get so enthused about your reasons for staying that you are so busy focusing on what's great about staying in your marriage that you don't really have that much time and energy and focus left to concern yourself with the things you don't really like about your marriage. That's true more generally, by the way. It doesn't just apply to infidelity. If you can focus so intently on the things that are awesome about your marriage that you just don't have that much bandwidth left to think much about what isn't awesome about your marriage, your experience of your marriage is going to be awesome, or at least a lot more awesome than it would be if you were to focus on the things you do not think are awesome about your marriage. When we use our power to focus on what we enjoy and appreciate and love to our advantage, we can totally transform our experience of being married, or of anything else for that matter. When we use our power to focus intentionally, we can totally transform our experience of being alive. So that's something to keep in mind if you are certain you are staying married for reasons that you like. It's also worth remembering that we get to decide whether someone's infidelity is a problem for us or not, or how much of a problem we want to make it. Now, before I go any further, let me make it absolutely clear that if you thought you were in a monogamous relationship with someone and they did/are doing something that you think counts as cheating, you have every right to not like that. You have every right to not like that one bit. But here's the paradox. If you know someone has cheated on you and is perhaps continuing to cheat on you, and you decide you want to stay with them anyway, you have the option of deciding if you want to continue to not like that. Maybe you want to decide that their cheating is just a feature of who your partner is and what your partner does. Maybe you decide that their cheating is something that you're going to consider neutral. You could decide to think that way. Because, in fact, the behaviors that we think of as cheating are neutral until we give them meaning. And we collectively have pretty much decided that cheating is really bad, but you don't have to think that way. You could decide to think that cheating isn't that big of a deal. You certainly don't have to decide to think that way, but doing that is one way to, as this listener wrote, stop torturing yourself when you can't force someone to do what you want them to do. If you're choosing to stay with your partner, even though they cheat and you don't like that, you have the option to stop not liking it, so to speak. You have the option of deciding to not be so bothered by their cheating. That might sound crazy, but it's totally possible if you want to do that. And if you want to think that way, it is a very effective way to set yourself free. Here's a related but unrelated example of how we can change our thinking to not just solve problems, but make problems disappear. I recently helped organize a reunion of returned Peace Corps volunteers who served in Zambia. I am a returned Peace Corps volunteer who served in Zambia. And I was reminded, when I saw this friend of mine, I was reminded of a situation that a friend of mine encountered during his service in Zambia. In Zambia, when I was there, most volunteers lived in rural villages, and most Zambian villagers did not have a heck of a lot of resources. I think that our stipend as volunteers was roughly equivalent to $200 a month, and that made us millionaires by village standards. So having things like enough firewood or charcoal was never a big deal for Peace Corps volunteers. But on the other hand, plenty of villagers had a hard time obtaining or buying charcoal or firewood. So in this situation, this friend of mine, this fellow volunteer, had a guy stealing firewood from him in his village. Some guy in the village just kept on stealing his firewood. It just kept happening and happening. And so finally, this friend of mine told the firewood thief that he could help himself to as much firewood as he wanted to, whenever he wanted to, from his supply. And that put an end to the stealing. Not because the guy stopped taking firewood, but because it was being explicitly given to him. The construct of stealing was removed from the situation. You could do something similar in response to your spouse's infidelity if you wanted to. You could decide to stay with them for reasons that you like, and since you want to free yourself from your own self-imposed torture, you're going to decide that they have your permission to cheat. Another option, yet another option, there are so many options here. Another option is to continue disliking their cheating and their lying and their whatever, and get really, really good at digesting the feelings that come from disliking their cheating. We're allowed to keep whatever thoughts we want to keep, as long as we're willing to bear the feelings that those thoughts generate. And when we're willing to bear our feelings, we significantly reduce our experience of suffering. We can continue to dislike something and also change our relationship to that dislike. Crazy, right? Finally, I'm just going to say that if none of the options I've mentioned here seem even slightly appealing to you, it might be worth reconsidering your reasons for wanting to stay married to someone who is doing something you don't like. Maybe the benefits don't outweigh the drawbacks for you. Maybe they do, but it's important to give yourself the option of that not being the case. Okay, next question here. I love this one. I love them all, but I love this one very much. The listener writes, "You say a lot on the podcast that should feels like shit." Yes, I do. I interpret this as meaning that we're not going to feel very good about doing things if our reasoning is purely out of a sense of obligation or doing something because other people / society think it's the quote unquote right thing to do. My question is, don't all of us have to do things based purely out of obligation? I do things at my job that I don't particularly want to do because I quote unquote should do it. If I didn't do them, the business would suffer. I do many things with and for my kids because I quote unquote should do them. If I didn't, then my kids would miss out on experiences that make them happy. If all of us just stopped doing things that we only did because we should do them or were obligated to, then society would fall apart pretty quickly. If staying in a marriage keeps a spouse and children happy, why isn't it enough to simply say, I need to stay because I should stay? Okay. These kinds of questions about shoulds and society falling apart come up in my sessions with clients all the time. And I understand where people are coming from when they say that we have to do some things purely out of obligation because otherwise society would fall apart. So here's my multi-part response to this listener's question and to, all of the folks who are listening and thinking this question but didn't write it into me. Yes, the answer is that when I say that should feels like shit, I do mean that we usually don't feel great when we think we should do something, or when we think we have to do something, or when we think we don't have a choice about whether we do something or not. Simply thinking that we should do something, or that we have to do something, is enough to make us feel like shit. We don't have to actually do the thing in order to feel like shit, but if we do the thing, we may feel like shit then too. Very possibly, in fact. Now, my answer to the question, don't all of us have to do things purely out of obligation, is no. We don't have to do anything for any reason. We don't have to go to work. We don't have to make money. We don't have to do things for our kids. We don't even have to take care of our kids. We could just leave them on the, park bench somewhere. We don't have to do things for our spouses or our parents or our friends or our neighbors or anyone else for that matter. We don't have to pay our taxes. We don't have to drive the speed limit. We don't have to brush our teeth. We don't have to observe the law. We don't even have to stay alive. If we don't want to keep on living, we can take our own lives if we want to, and if we have the capacity to. Now, it might seem like that's an extreme point to make, but I think it's really important for us to recognize the degree of choice we have in any situation. We have choices about all of the things I just mentioned. And we usually have more choices in any situation than we recognize, or a greater degree of choice than we recognize. So, for example, you could quite literally choose to not do the things at your job that you don't want to do. There might be consequences to not doing them, that's for sure. Let's say you don't do the things in your job description. If you don't do them, the business or the organization you're a part of might not meet certain objectives, and you might get reprimanded or fired or demoted, or any number of other things might happen. That's entirely possible. But that doesn't mean that you have to do the things in your job description. You could not do them and see what happens. That is totally an option. And that brings me to the first thing I want you to consider when you think you have to do something, or you should do something, or you think you're obligated to do something. A lot of the time, when we think we should do something, or we think we have to do something, what we really mean is that we don't like the idea of the potential consequences of not doing the something. And that's fair enough. But that's different from believing that you don't have a choice about whether you do the thing or not. You probably do have a choice. You probably have multiple choices in relation to the thing that you think you have to do, in fact, right? And this is important because recognizing the choices we have and the options we have tends to help us feel empowered, or at least relatively empowered, rather than feeling constrained or powerless. And you've heard me talk about the think, feel, act cycle on this podcast. Our feeling state determines our capacity to take particular kinds of actions or refrain from taking particular kinds of actions. And in very general terms, we're able to get a lot more done in life when we're feeling empowered rather than powerless or constrained. And we tend to take a lot more responsibility for our choices and our actions when we feel empowered rather than constrained. Isn't that interesting? Furthermore, when we remove obligation and replace it with choice, we often choose to do things that we don't 100% love the idea of doing. Not because we believe we have to do them, but because we like the results we imagine we'll get from doing them better than we like the results we imagine we'll get from not doing them. We choose to do things we don't have to do all the time, right? We may do things at work that we don't really like to do because we simply prefer the idea of what's going to happen when we do it to the idea of what would happen if we didn't do it, right? I'm sure you can think of other examples of this kind of thing happening in your own life. And here's a really minor, yet not so minor example from my own life. I hate washing my face at night. I really hate it. That might sound ridiculous, but it is something that I truly dislike doing and truly don't want to do. It may be a small thing, but it's a daily thing. And every day, or pretty close to it, I get to a point in the evening when I say to myself, I don't want to wash my face. I don't feel like doing that right now. And then I remind myself that I have the option to not wash my face. And I'm like, yeah, I don't have to. And I choose to do it even though I don't really want to, because I do really want what I get out of going to the trouble to wash my face. That's just a little example, of course, but sometimes the little examples are the best examples. There are a lot of other examples of things that I choose to do in my life, even though I don't especially want to do them. And I see other people doing this all of the time too. Many of us choose to do things that we don't really want to do because we believe it's better on the whole, to do those things than to not do them. And this is one of the reasons why I don't think society would fall apart if we stopped doing things out of a sense of obligation or from a position of believing we don't have a choice. And moreover, plenty of people do not do the things that they are supposed to do or that they are legally obligated to do or that we as a society have decided that they should do, right? Even when we tell people they should do things, they don't necessarily do them. And we might not like that, but somehow or another, humans keep collectively stumbling forward. Society hasn't collapsed quite yet, by some measures anyway. And recognizing the agency that we already have isn't likely to hasten our demise. In fact, it might even help avert it. That's my guess anyway. The other big thing I want you to consider about shoulds is that when we believe we should do something, there may be a genuine desire within that should or within that sense of obligation. There may be an element of what we think we're obligated to do that we truly want to do. But we may not want to do it in the way that we think we have to or the way that we think we should. We might not yet have imagined that there could be a way to do it other than the way we think we should. So, having said all of that, let me return to the last part of this listener's question, which was, if staying in a marriage keeps a spouse and children happy, why isn't it enough to simply say, I need to stay because I should stay? Technically, it might be enough to tell yourself that you need to stay because you should stay, insofar as thinking this way might drive you to take the action of staying married. And if that's the point, if simply staying married is the point, then thinking this way may be enough to do that. Fair enough. But if you stay married and you don't want to, is that a win? You get to decide. It could be a win for you, but it's possible that your goal isn't to stay married by any means necessary. It's possible that what you really want is to be a caring, involved, loving, supportive parent and a supportive, friendly, caring, responsible ex-spouse. It's possible that you want to be a good family member to your current spouse and kids. You might want that very much. But it's possible that you might be able to find a way to do that without staying married to your current spouse. It's possible that you want to be a good family member to these humans that you care about so much, and you also want to be free to explore relationships with other people other than your current spouse. That's a lot of others. And if those are your desires, you can take action in the service of them. You can create a reality that honors your values and priorities by honoring your desires rather than believing you have to do or you should do certain things. So, in other words, if the desire behind the should is, I want to do right by my family, you may be able to do that without staying married. There are many ways to, quote unquote, do right by people we love and care about without sacrificing what's most important to us. There is more than one means to any end. Crazy. All right, everyone, that is it for today. I am going to keep answering listeners' questions in future episodes, like I said earlier. But for now, I've got more questions on hand than I'll be able to answer anytime soon. So I am not actively soliciting any more questions. If you send me one, nothing bad will happen, but I might not get to it. However, if you want to talk to me about your infidelity situation, if you want to directly ask me questions about your infidelity situation, let's work together. You can get yourself an appointment for an introductory coaching session with me by going to my website, mariemurphyphd.com. When we work together, we take a close look at the specifics of what you've got going on and come up with answers to your questions that help you move forward in ways you feel great about. Amazing. Okay, that's it for today. Have a good week, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.